First question is, can everybody see a PowerPoint screen up? And Graham, do you have the ability to be able to see if people are having issues or what have you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you for that, Graham. Graham is the Director of Technology here at 501 Commons, and my name again is Matt Aspen. I'm the HR and Training Programs Manager at 501 Commons. We are a nonprofit that is focused, our mission is focused on capacity building for other nonprofits. So that's why we're here and that's what we do. And if you are not familiar with us, I hope this will give you a sense of what we do. And hopefully we can continue to support you with anything else that comes up that's not covered here today. Thank you for joining us. So why is this not going down? There we go. The intended outcomes today. We are obviously in an unprecedented time. We are all of us being forced to find new ways of doing what we need to get done. Our focus today, our overall focus, is first to help you make sure that you're able to accurately and efficiently take care of the work that needs to be done for the mission of your nonprofit, but also at the same time to take care of your employees. Your employees are experiencing all kinds of change. You have work things that are changing. In addition to focusing on making sure that the work gets taken care of, we also want to make sure that your employees are taken care of at the same time. So that's going to be the grounding of all that we talk about today. Our agenda, we're going to talk about remote work setup, home office best practices, but really managing remotely effectively, and Graham's going to talk to us a good bit about that. I'm going to take some time to really talk about managing individuals remotely, the unique things, the unique challenges of managing folks remotely, and also some of the opportunities that are, the unexpected opportunities that are available from managing remotely. I'll pass that back to Graham. He'll talk about some specific things around managing teams remotely. And then we thought this is a unique section. We have found some of our clients have really significantly been financially impacted already, despite the resources that are available to help organizations make it through this. Sometimes this is having folks have to think about actually doing a reduction in force. So we wanted to talk about some resources available to help you with that. Oops, went too far. Okay, so today we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to give you a lot of information to take in. We've really tried to pare down each thing that we're going to talk about to 3 key elements that you want to think about. And then for each resource or for each element, we'll share some resources to help you take a look at those areas. And we have specifically designed a lot of time at the end for Q&A. Because we're just trying to touch high level, we're going to go a mile wide and an inch deep. And we know that it's your questions, your specific things that you're struggling with that are going to really be the things that help make this as impactful as possible for folks. Let's see. One other thing, as we were beginning to put this together, we started to embed some resources into the PowerPoint slide, which we will make available for you at the end. But in this rapidly changing time, we quickly realized that we also have a section on our website that is designed to make to just start to be a capture place for all of these. So we are going to make sure that you have a link to that site, and that has more resources that you can possibly know. So as often happens in rapidly changing situations, you start out down a path and then you realize new things are coming up and you figure out a way to adapt and make it better. So that's what we're kind of doing here today. All right, Graham, I'm going to pass back to you.
Thank you. So a big part of this change is moving from the office space into the home office. And what happens when employees shift from that sort of being in the same space to being separated by, physically, and not, they don't have the chance to sort of say hello, work together in a single workspace. You're not seeing each other. You also don't have generally the tool. So often, You don't have your desk and your screens and your keyboard and all those tools. You might have a laptop that you've brought home. And that presents some challenges because all of a sudden employees are faced with shifting how they work and trying to recreate that environment at home. So, first and foremost, we recommend that you extend your intended culture and expectations to the home. Meaning, ideally staff are still showering, shaving, dressing somewhat professionally so that when they show up, they can have video and you can be seeing each other. It's really important to consider, and use things like video in your screen sharing to create that intimacy and create that connection between staff. Um, I recommend that organizations don't just, rely on the phone or rely on email, but use the modern technology and communications tools at their disposal. That won't happen. They won't use video if people don't feel comfortable being on screen, being on display for others. And so just as when they would say go to the office and do whatever routine they have to be present themselves, it's important to do those same things at home so that they can show up and be comfortable when everyone else is on video. That's really important to maintain that culture, maintaining at least some of the intimacy that we expect when we're, working together. Being able to see not just verbal cues, but nonverbal cues like smiles and, frowns and all of the things that, that are part of communication. So extending some of those expectations into the home becomes really important as part of this. We want to ensure that our teams stay, connected and that people are not siloed as they start moving outside, moving home. Consistently share and reinforce best practices. So making sure that you as, the managers are communicating expectations about the workplace, making sure that they have, ergonomic workspaces. So do people have are not just sitting on their beds, typing on a laptop on their lap, but that they're set up so that people can work in a healthy manner from their home office. That's really important. Also, being mindful of the disparity between employees, and that's one of the things we really talk about, that I think about, is that all of these changes raise a lot of issues that relate to the sort of differences in circumstances of families and people. So, for example, whether someone lives in a one-bedroom in a studio apartment or in a home where they have a home office, you can have staff that are in very different situations that yield unique and different challenges that create disparities and inequities between staff. Also, situations such as, you might have single parents or parents whose spouses are first responders. I have friends that are in this situation where for instance, my neighbor, her husband is a police officer, and there is no choice about the ability for her husband to be at home, and yet she is a professional and working from home at the same time and needs to have meetings. And so she's really challenged by this scenario, and having a child. And she was telling me the story in the alley the other day about the kid wants one thing and the cat's puking over here, and these family environments are invading the workspace in a way. And so being tolerant and being supportive of employees in these situations. Also, some staff may not be able to afford strong internet connectivity. So some support for staff, especially maybe staff that are at lower levels that might not normally have strong internet access, helping them get what they need to be productive employees, really is important. And it's important for the agency and organization to be cognizant of those disparities. And we're Falcon Commons is in Seattle, and it's an expensive place to live. And so some of our staff may not have be able to access certain resources and have the access that that they would have there to have. Otherwise, that other staff with more financial capacity might have. And so it's important for us as an agency and other organizations and agencies to be supportive of their employees. There's other factors, for example, where people live can also affect their ability to access internet, strong internet. And so there's often, it might be important to take a case-by-case basis to evaluate situations and help people, support people in adapting to the situation. So another option is also let people take home equipment. So for example, in some cases, if people are, maybe they don't have an extra monitor at home, or they don't have, some of the tools. So let them check out things like monitors and docking stations and keyboards and things. I, for example, went and got my chair from my office because I didn't have a decent work chair, and I got that and took that home before this all started. So there's a number of ways that are creative, often that don't cost money, but shifting policies and creating a framework that supports staff is really important as part of this process. And I'm going to ask read a question here. So the question is, a lot of our employees are facing issues with slow internet connection. I've asked them to consider upgrading internet speed. Do they need Wi-Fi, etc.? Do you have suggestions for a checklist of questions or things to ask them to check regarding their internet connections and equipment at home? Okay, so that is a great question. And I would suggest a couple of things. First and foremost, they should just run a basic speed check on their home internet. So being able to go on and Google speed test, and Google has one. There's also one from a company called Ookla, O-O-K-L-A. And those can be used to just test whether or not the internet connectivity is satisfactory. You're looking for two things in speed. You're looking for low latency. So this would be usually measured in a metric like milliseconds. And in fact, let's see. If I can do this, I will run a speed test here to show you. I'm going to stop sharing the presentation, Matt, to show you this, to show this here. So I'm going to Google speed test. Wait, my browser is stuck.
You're failing the speed test.
Here, give me a second again. Okay, I'm gonna Google. I'm just gonna use the Ookla one that's pretty common at the top of search results. And so I happen to have CenturyLink internet, and I click go and run a speed test. And so this is going to show my internet speeds here at home. I am fortunate in that I live in a neighborhood that has CenturyLink fiber. And so you can see here that I have a 2 millisecond ping time, and so that means that's how fast any individual packet of information can traverse the internet. And then the download speed and upload speeds are how much information can flow at a single time. ping tests and latency here is really important to things like audio and screen sharing, any teleconferencing and video, because that's what creates sort of jittery sound or jumpy things. Generally, internet teleconferencing doesn't require a ton of bandwidth. It requires low latency. Um, Also, they can do some things like look for people streaming video and audio on their home network, moving physically closer to their Wi-Fi access point. It can be really helpful because often walls and other physical barriers create issues as far as speed. So do a test of latency, move around and look and see if changing where they are in the home changes latency, changes the connection speed, and then you can use the speed test and run it in different places to do the test. Let's see, checklist. Also, let's see, I think that's sort of the most like I can advise in terms of sort of lay steps to consider. But distance, number of walls, those are all important. Yeah. So will Wi-Fi extender improve latency? No. In fact, the Wi-Fi extender can actually make latency worse, depending on it, because sometimes it means that your connection your computer has to make multiple hops to get out to the internet. So latency, it really depends on the strength of the connection, frankly. But an extender or a mesh network can sometimes make latency worse. It's all about playing. There's no silver bullet here. If you have a weak connection and problems in your connectivity, extenders can help. But test, move around and test, and then see how it happens. Sometimes extenders will actually decrease the bandwidth that you have, effective bandwidth. They sort of extend the distance, but of the coverage, but they can reduce the bandwidth because the extender has to both send and receive all the data in the same pipe, essentially, the same bandwidth. So if you have 100 megabit bandwidth, the extender has to both receive and send the data, so it gets a 50. That is something to consider about that. So anyways, and also look out for having a ton of devices. Some people may have had Wi-Fi routers that are 5-6 years old, but they've since added 3 iPads, a Roomba and a Chrome device, Chrome or Fire TV, or all the different things. And so adding devices can also help slow things down. One thing that you can do is disconnect things like that Roomba or the TV connectivity streaming device, because having older Wi-Fi devices in your network can affect the speed of everyone. Because what happens is that in a Wi-Fi network, everybody's talking to the router, and if only one device can talk at the same time. So the more devices you have, the more chance there is that there is conflict between them and that they'll slow each other down. And the older devices are worse. So removing older Wi-Fi devices from your network can also help in this. Some of the newer routers have ways a new router can help solve some of these problems, but it's not always a silver bullet. Removing old Wi-Fi devices does help. So I'm going to pass it back to Matt. Matt, you'll have to screen share again.
All right, I'm ready to go. Oh, hey, it jumped on me. All right, perfect. All right, thank you, Graham. We also have additional resources available. Again, I said we're going to share these as we go. There is a full webinar on the Tech Impact site, Preparing for Remote Work. So that link will be available if you really want to go deeper dive into some of the pieces that Graham was just talking about. That is there.
And
Did you want to say?
sorry, I just wanted to correct, that's a prepareresponseserve.org website, not tech.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Yes. We also have and are making available sample telework agreements and sample temporary telework agreements. If you are a smaller nonprofit and you don't already have a telework agreement implemented, we're making a sample available for you. Obviously, you want to make sure that you tailor that to your organization. And even if you do have a telework agreement, again, with the expectations and all of the pieces that you want to make sure that employees are aware of and adhering to. We also have a sample of a temporary telecommuting arrangement, which is that expansion of, okay, this is our normal rules, but now because we're having to do more things than we might before, expanding that out. So we're just trying to make a lot of resources available to help you out with these things. All right, managing individuals remotely. There's three things that we want to cover here. And I talked in the beginning about we want to manage work and also take care of employees. So we'll talk about managing the work. And even though it's focused on the work, you're also having to take care of your employees while you do that. We're going to talk about how this move to forced remote may actually create many new opportunities, both for the way that you do work and potentially for the employees that are doing the work. So we're gonna explore that a little bit. And then we're gonna focus really on the employee side of things to close out this section to talk about managing employees during a crisis and the things that they need to stay healthy and focused on what you need. So the first and most important thing, I think it's safe to say that any conversation about managing work remotely is grounded in the idea of just good management principles in general. What you are basically having to do is just be even more mindful of how you would manage well in person and just be much more intentional about it in that move to remote work. In this time of crisis during the COVID-19 episode that we're going through, many things change, many priorities shift. As leaders, you're having to figure out, what do we cut, what do we keep, how do we keep the lights on? And so a lot of the work of leadership is getting crystal clear on priorities. So, mission is always number one. You have to constantly look at, are we able to deliver our mission? What do we need to do to adapt to be able to deliver our mission? And then what are the programs that we deliver? And do we need to adapt those to take care of the people that we're serving? And then finally, organization and employee safety. So really getting clear on what your priorities are. We're going to share some resources. If you, the biggest thing if you're being financially impacted is to look at your cash flow. So we're going to share a template around how to help you look at your cash flow if you want to make some projections to see what it's going to look like potentially on the other side. We know a lot of nonprofits have lost or missed out on their big annual fundraising opportunities that happened during this time, and they've had to change on that. So the most important thing is, as a leader, continually taking a look at what's going on, what's changing, what your constraints are, what your opportunities are. Figure out what is important and how you're going to do what you need to do, and then communicate what those things that you need to work on are going to do to impact on the day-to-day work of your employees. And again, this is where we get into just basic management 101. As the leader, you need to know what work needs to be done. You need to work in conjunction with your employees to identify the resources they need, to set very smart goals, specific measurable goals that folks can work on to their tasks. And then really important is consistent check-ins, even more so than you would if you were in the workplace. When you're in the workplace, that's more conducive to just casual flybys. Hey, I need a thing, or hey, I have a question. I need this thing. Sometimes that's not as easy to do remotely, or people aren't used to using chat functions. Maybe they're used to just talking, like leaning over to the person next to them and saying, hey, how do I do this thing? So it's important as leaders, if you have a weekly check-in with a staff person, maybe it's an everyday 5-minute check-in instead, just to check in. What are you doing? What are you working on? Where are you stuck? Do you know what you're going to work on today? Okay, what's that going to look like? And let's check back in. Obviously, every employee is going to have different needs, but all of us need to have a clear sense of what is the priority and what does success look like for this task that I'm taking on, and that's our job as leaders, is to make sure that folks aren't sitting at home confused about what to do or how to do it, and they have the resources that they need. This, I think this is one of the most exciting pieces of this time. I've talked to some colleagues, I've talked to some professionals in the industries, and one of the things they've noted is that there's a real opportunity here in terms of breaking out of patterns that develop just by the structure of the work that we do. So if you think about your own work environment, the folks that you probably spend most of your time with are the folks on your team, your specific team, or the folks that have a schedule similar to yours. Maybe you sort of are in the break room at lunch together all the time. The people whose offices you walk by on the way to the bathroom. And you get into patterns. You get to make connections with some people in an organization and maybe never have the opportunity to talk to them otherwise. This is a potential opportunity to intentionally try to create some new connections in your organization. Create opportunities to help people make connections and develop relationships and find resources that they would not have had just if they always just were in the pattern that they had in your organization. Pull out your wish list. As nonprofits, we are always trying to do more with less, trying to get what we can get done, and never enough time and hours in the day. And there's always those things that you say, well, geez, if I only had a little bit more time, I'd love to invest in more staff training. I'd love to organize those online files that have just gotten out of control. I'd love to document our processes that only one person knows, but we're all just going too fast to do it. If you've got employees whose job used to be direct service, and they've got a little bit, maybe they're having to do things differently, you've got some gaps of time that you need to fill out. All those things on your, boy, I sure wish we could have done this at some point, are great projects to have people take a look at during these times when our work has been interrupted. And then the other thing that we know is happening a lot is this scenario is creating those places where you say, I guess we really weren't all that prepared for this. So this is where, if you have any time at all, if you've got an employee that can work on some of these things, really getting deep dive around what's our disaster recovery, what's our disaster recovery plan, and then also, as we are transitioning back, once the restrictions get lifted, there may be places where you're going to have to reconsider how you deliver services. Maybe some people you're finding can work remotely just fine. Maybe you're going to have to modify how you provide direct services. This is the time where you can start to think about not just how do we manage now, how are we going to manage when we go back into the next step. So very important to be planning, using this time to find those things. In terms of managing during a crisis, I'm just going to touch on this very, very quickly. Graham mentioned that the reality is that we are all in an unprecedented time, and folks are having to manage their lives and fear and worrying about their relatives, homeschooling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll just say again, reasonable expectations. And then the other piece, and this is part of what you're doing today, is really keeping yourself informed. This is a rapidly emerging situation. The impacts to your organization are constantly changing. The resources that are available are constantly changing. When you are in a crisis, employees really need three things. They need consistency. That helps to relay anxieties. They need transparency. They need to know what's going on and what could be impacting them. And they need predictability. They need to be able to say, okay, this is something that I know is going to be okay. So the work still needs to be done, but employees could be dealing with isolation. They could be dealing with fear. They're dealing with a lot of change. Again, homeschools and distractions. You really want to do as much homework as you can for their benefit and share as many resources as you can to try to help your employees be well taken care of. Again, I'm gonna skip through these here because we're gonna show you resources towards the end here. But we've got all kinds of resources available for employees to, what if I get sick? How do you communicate all the changes that are happening around your organization? We're gonna make sure that you have links to resources to be able to take care of those policies as you go along. Graham, any questions in the chat box before I continue on? No.
Sorry, so far none. I muted myself.
That's okay. That's all right. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Graham, who's going to talk about managing teams remotely.
So I'm talking about managing teams. I'm as leader director of our technology services for a long time. Our teams have often been remote, and we have staff that have been essentially permanently remote at times, even prior to this crisis. I think that there are a few things to consider as part of this. First of all, communicate. So this is ensuring that you create the everybody needs to have the information they need and not be left out of the loop. It's easy to have one-on-one conversations and or sort of small group conversations and have staff that become isolated or siloed in their position. So it's very important to use communication tools and ensure that, when there are changes, when there's information, they become, there's regular updates to all staff. So email is a good way, using group collaboration tools, whether you use Teams or Slack, those are great, but creating that space and ensuring that there's a place for where staff can find information and they're not left out. That's all extremely important. And as Matt said, so much of this is just doing what you would normally should be doing, but doing it even, but being intentional about doing it even better. Because all of the risks and downsides that can happen, even when in business as usual, they're just amplified by the current situation and by working remote. On the upside, it gives that intentionality will lead so many benefits that hopefully carry forward to improve your organization in the future. Creating intentional opportunities for social connection. So again, making sure that when I have a team meeting, having a check-in with staff to see how they're doing, having creating that space in the the Zoom meeting or wherever it is to talk about people's lives and see how they're check-in personally as a group, share and create, not just being transactional but being personal as part of our communications. That's really important. I know businesses have done Zoom happy hour and things, not just with friends, but with their work teams, to have that sort of check-in and that social space. Also celebrating success. So watching for the wins and making sure that those get communicated. And this is, sharing innovations, especially as we are all doing something new, like making sure that you share the innovations that that staff create, and broadcasting that to recognize success. Because so often we're used to kudos and say all staff meetings or such, but you have the opportunity as you move more remote to do some of these things more consistently and on a more sort of on a regular basis, so that that teams feel connected to the organization. And is there? Let's see, Matt. What's on the next slide? Sorry. Can we proceed? Yeah. And then, one of the things actually I want to mention that isn't on that slide is also the importance of things like project management. And that goes into that communication piece. I think it's really important more than ever to do good project management of teams, making sure, this goes to define, back to managing individuals, but tracking tasks well and tracking them as a group and all the communication around project management. This is a practice that I firmly believe all organizations should be employing to be successful in their work. But good project management, this is a great time to review what you're doing and what the tools are and structures you need in place are, to make sure that there's clarity and visibility across your teams as to what's happening. This will help you because, in particular with remote teams, and especially in this time, some staff are working unusual or odd schedules. For example, there are folks who are sharing, childcare and homeschooling with their spouse. And so they're having to work half days or work in the evenings at odd times. And so good project management will really help keep managers confident that staff are doing their jobs, and keep colleagues confident that they're working together and that their colleagues are being accountable to each other. And so all of that is incredibly important to do during this time. So if this link below, bit.ly/COVID or 501 COVID HR resources, we have some more resources on that at this link for talking about employer resources for employees, employers, and how to protect your agency. Matt, do you have anything to add to this? You're muted, Matt.
All right. No, I think the real key there is, like you said, the intentionality. And I think, we don't always think about the social aspect of the workplace. A lot of times as leaders, we're so focused on delivering the mission, but it is the employees and the teams. And a lot of I think the one thing I'll add is that it's counterintuitive, but extroverts actually tend to do better working remotely than introverts, because they will naturally find the ways to make connections. Whereas introverts, the workplace sort of creates that system for them to have meaningful interactions with folks. And sometimes they might not seek that out, and slowly over time become isolated, because left to their own devices, they're just going to kind of do their own thing. I'm an introvert, so I can attest to that. And so that's, as a leader, it is sometimes that's why it becomes important to really help people stay connected, even if they don't think they need it. Human connection is an important thing for all of us. All right. Thank you, Graham. So then we get to the challenge. What to do if this financial downturn that is attached to this the COVID work reduction? What to do if a reduction in force becomes necessary? I used to work for an outplacement firm, and I've been on site for many of these large downsizings at companies. It's never fun, but there are certainly things that you can do to make the process as painless for both the impacted employees, and most importantly, what a lot of people forget is the impact on the remaining employees. So we're going to talk about that. So the first thing is you've got to sort of make the hard decision, and usually, or what you need to do that is information. And so we're going to have some resources around what to look at. And then communicating to anybody that is impacted, and then communicating to the remaining employees. So making this tough decision, I've said this a couple of times, the focus on the mission is always the number one priority. As things shift and as your resource availability changes, you always have to come back to the mission and then your programs and say, what can we continue to do? Is there anything that we need to put on hold, etc. And so if you have things that can be or must be put on hiatus, that may impact your budget. You want to definitely, in a time like this, develop a 6-month or even a shorter term budget if you're really that just on that line. And we have a beautiful 6-month budget template available again on the website to help you just quickly. It's not a quick process, but to, as efficiently as possible, really look at your cash flow and determine if you need to make any difficult decisions. Again, strategizing service delivery around core mission and eliminate peripheral programs if that becomes absolutely necessary. All right, so if you do your analysis and you realize that you are going to have to make some cuts that are going to impact some folks, there's some best practices around this. Again, consistency, transparency, and predictability are always going to be your buzzwords. Again, we'll take a look at some of the resources in the section, but the bottom line is share the news. Be as succinct as you can. We are having to make a decision. It is going to impact your employment. In this case, you can talk about the scenarios that happened that led to this. Maybe it's our annual fundraiser had to be postponed, and we're just not going to have the money to keep the program going. Or our program delivery is going to have to change significantly because we can't do it in, whatever it is, share the news, why you came to the decision, all the other opportunities you came up with, but you very quickly want people to know what you're talking about and how it impacts them. And then in terms of taking care of people, before you have this conversation, go and find all of the resources that you find that are available to help folks with this transition. So if you have anything in your policy that talks about severance, you want to make sure that you make those things available. If there's COVID-19 specific layoff resources, and again, we're going to make all those available for you to have at your fingertips. But make sure as you're delivering this not great news that you are giving everybody all the employees all the information they need to try to minimize anxiety and let them know that they have resources to step to. And then this complete administrative steps, this is a place where you can really, a lot of smaller nonprofits, you're focused on mission, you don't have a lot of turnover, everybody's trying to do the work. There are steps that have to be taken when you terminate somebody. You have to cut off their IT access, you have to gather back all their materials, you have to shut off you have to do their COBRA eligibility if they have benefits. If you don't have real strong steps in place to process a termination, make sure that you have all those things in place and that you enact them. And this is the thing that often gets left off, but is really the key piece, is communicating to the remaining employees what happened and why. Tell them what's happening. If you can, keep it to departments or positions as opposed to, Steve is leaving or here. We've had to eliminate the program support position in our service division because of this, and these are the things that we've taken a look at and why. One of the main things, that people worry about when they realize that their peers have been impacted is what about me? And you want to make sure, if you've done your assessment, you should have a pretty clear sense of why you had to cut a position and why you were able to keep a position. You want to reassure and let people know that their position at this point is safe. And then really cast a realistic, and it's got to be realistic because people will be able to tell if you're just sort of fluffing it up, but a hopeful vision for the future. We've made these decisions. Yes, they're bad. Yes, we wish we didn't have to impact people, but the fact that we've done this now is going to allow us to focus and be more successful in the future. And again, we've got all kinds of resources. I keep talking about resources. I hope we'll have some time to kind of go through them a little bit. But we've got great scenarios, or we've got great resources for employees, services that are available to them if they have to get laid off. A good checklist, like I said, if you do have to terminate employees, some samples for that, termination letter samples. Again, trying to make this all simple for you so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And with that, I think we want to open this up for questions. And Graham, you and I talked about maybe trying to bring up some of these documents to share. Are there any questions in the chat box at this point?
Right now, I think we've answered all the questions. Is there anything that anyone would like to us to revisit or expand upon? One thing I want to follow up with related to the speed is it doesn't hurt. One diagnostic step you can also take is to plug a laptop directly in your internet router and see if your speed issues, if that addresses the speed issues or latency issues that you have. And that helps you sort of incrementally test, is it my Wi-Fi or is it my ISP? Also, you know, at this time, we have definitely seen certain cloud services and online services have bandwidth issues and have, you know, there's just significant load on many of the systems out there at this time. And so be aware of that and be aware that it might not be you. And one question is, we have complaints about the amount of emails going out with so many resource and information updates. We have started a folder on a shared drive as a resource for staff to find information. Do you have any other suggestions? Well, I like the idea of, I like the idea of a folder on your system, but I would also suggest you think of something like a blog or news feed internally. So whether you know, look at the technology tools you have, and looking for something where you can post to that isn't email. So whether you have, if you're on my Office 365 using Teams and have a channel where you post resources and information to, that would be good. If you're on Google, you know, you could use Google Sites or some other resource, or use Slack to post information. So think about the different mediums and ways you communicate electronically and how you can use mediums and channels that are separate, that don't fill up email inboxes. I definitely agree that so much we put through email doesn't need to go through email. And that's what some of those other tools can help with. Sort of more passive areas for people to look for resources when they need it. Also, we have a question, Matt, probably for you. For the FFCRA paid sick leave, an employer with less than 50 employees can claim exemption for the additional 10 weeks of pay if schools are closed. Do we have to apply for the exemption, or do you know how that works?
That's a good question. I do believe you have to. Let me point you to the resource on our website. Graham, can you see the website now? Am I sharing the website or not?
No, you're not sharing right now.
All right, let's try this. How about now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. This is the page that we're pointing everybody to in the resources that we have. And I'm having a hard time finding my mouse. There we go. Under here in the HR section, all the questions that you have about that are, let me see, that's not what you looked for. First. It'll take me a second to find the right one, but we've made it such that all of the pieces that you should need should be available here.
So I got a question. You mentioned, while you're finding that, I'm going to review this question.
Okay.
You mentioned good project management tactics and tools. Do you have any good resources to read or review, or tools you would suggest? For what it's worth, we are a small org, less than 5. So I think it depends. A lot of organizations, especially if things are changing, using a Scrum type methodology where you have, say, a daily stand-up can be a really good way to keep momentum and keep teams moving forward and in touch. So stand-up meetings every day, and in a stand-up, Scrum methodology, you generally talk about like what you accomplished the day before, what you're doing that day, and do you have any blocking issues that you need to address. So if everyone answers those 3 questions, and then any further discussion gets taken offline or into a separate conversation. You don't stand around turn that into a half an hour conversation of a topic. That is a purely status meeting to move that forward. So that is really good, a good way for a group to stay in touch and work together. And that can be done, as I said, easily with some of these, with conferencing tools. If you have Zoom, if you have Teams, if you're on Google, use Hangouts and have that daily Scrum. I'd highly recommend it. The other thing, as far as technology tools, I would say if you're on Office 365, look at Microsoft Planner. It's actually built into, it can be added to Microsoft Teams or built into Microsoft Teams, or you can just go to Planner within the Office 365 portal. That gives you a Kanban style task assignment planning tool. You can also use Trello, Trello. That's a very common and popular Kanban style project management tool. If you really want a deep, more detailed project management tool, Asana, I believe, is popular with some organizations, and it's free, I believe, for 10 or fewer users. So you can get for nonprofits. So Asana is also an option. But I would suggest, think about, say, the Scrum style daily stand-up. What did you do the day? What did you do? What are you going to be doing? What is blocking you? Or what do you need? Are 3 questions to answer in that.
Okay. So Graham, I note that we're at the end of our time. Are there any more questions up there?
That's it. Did you confirm that the question about paid sick leave and needing?
I was going to say, if anybody has any questions that are still outstanding, I didn't find I've got to dig a little bit deeper. That's a bit of a deeper question to find the actual regulation on. My email address is matta, M-A-T-T-A, at 501commons.org. If you have any other specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them and get you the resources you need.
And if you do want, specific questions, actually, we should pull up is a quick consult on here, information on this page.
That's a great question. I don't think it's on this page, but it's...
So we should mention that we do 501 Commons does quick consults on technology and HR and finance. It's actually, It's the How Can We Help page. So if you go up under Services, How Can We Help? So right there is quick consults, and this is a good way to get in touch. You can get, you know, an hour with a technology professional or HR professional or finance professional for a modest price cost, and that will help you. We can answer quick questions and questions that are specific to your needs.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, everyone. Hang in there. We're all in this together. And I think we're learning all as we go, and we are here to help and are eager to help if you have any more questions that we can help with.
I've been recording this video, and I anticipate posting this to the recording of this to our website, along with the link to the resources pages mentioned in this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe.